Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male. And today we're going to be responding to Vaush and his video called Shocking. The Right is Dead Wrong About Trans People. So let's see what Vaush has to say. All right, let's get into it.
So, you know how, according to the input and sworn testimony of many hundreds of conservative demagogues who don't study the subject, transness is a social contagion? You've heard this, right? So, might be an issue with that narrative. According to a new trans demographic survey coming from Sweden, it looks like the prevalence of transgender people might be leveling out. See, you have pretty low numbers for a while because we hadn't invented trans people yet. And then, right around 2000, I guess 9/11 was when trans people were invented. I thought it was later, but whatever. And then it goes up, 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 up. And then it's gone down and seems to be leveling out quite a bit. Now, there are two narratives that you can take from this. One of them is that any big demographic shift like this is going to have a rubber banding effect, and that what we're looking at is a leveling off of the rate of transness. You might notice these numbers are incredibly small, by the way. Down here, we have trans women and trans men by both diagnosis and legal change. So the solid line is diagnosis, and the lighter one below it of the same color is legal change. So you've noticed for all of them, we go up and then boom, the biggest jump and then subsequent decline seems to be in transgender men and their diagnosis. Interestingly, the legal change has leveled out quite a bit more than the diagnosis, which has seen a decrease. Now, again, there are two big, fell off, exactly. There are two big takeaways from this. One argument, the argument that the conservatives are going to make, is that this is an example of how it's a social contagion, that it went up in popularity, but now it's decreasing in popularity. There is always going to be a rubber banding effect for literally any new social phenomena, whether it be, I don't know, racial demographics, identification as being gay or whatever, or being trans, because as things become more prominent, you do see that whiplash as people sort of work through uncertainty. It's kind of like how all women are bisexual in college, There will always be a period of time during which a period of exploration allows more people the opportunity to consider themselves this or that, and that might level out with time. And in fact, it has. We have the data now, at least very early data. It's one study, admittedly. Notice, by the way, how small these population proportions are. Look, this is right down here. We have trans women legal change. That is 5 people per 100,000 in a year. That's not a lot. Again, this is the crazy social epidemic that everyone was talking about. This is the massive, cataclysmic, taking over everything, taking over everyone, blah, blah, blah. This is what people were worried about. Now, you might notice that these only refer to diagnoses and legal change. That means that everyone here, this is the purview of going to a doctor, right? So if a person is non-binary but isn't interested in any kind of transition or legal change, they wouldn't be represented on this chart. We were exclusively talking about sort of medically recognized transness. Now, I think the idea that this is an indication of a social trend whiplashing back down is bullshit. I think that this is, in all likelihood, much more indicative of that left-handedness graph that we've seen. That in reality, even though all social standards, like being gay or straight or trans or cisgender, are subject to social forces and can change with time. For example, I think it's entirely possible for cultural shifts to mean that there are now more authentically gay people or less than before. That's how society is. People change. That's how life works, However, in reality, this is not an infinitely fluid dynamic. No matter what, no matter how society is oriented, some guys are always just going to be gay for pussy. And there will be some people, presumably, who remain gay for dick or whatever. There's always going to be some kind of balance. And likewise, the majority of people, as long as we have a gender binary, are probably going to remain cisgender for convenience's sake, if nothing else. So the idea of this being an epidemic of any kind is, as it always was, just Nazi rhetoric. It's Nazi rhetoric. Never forget, okay? First of all, rapid onset gender dysphoria was a term made up in a single paper where they got that term from interviewing transphobic parents of trans teens from like transphobic websites, forums, you know? Bullshit term to begin with. But they took it and they ran. The idea of progressivism or of degenerate sexual or social identities being an epidemic is just early Nazi rhetoric. It literally is what they said about homosexuals and transgenders too. So it's not new. I just think it's interesting that we're finally seeing this rounding off, you know? Now, obviously, as a gender abolitionist, I think that given the right set of social circumstances, these numbers might blur further, and eventually, you know, everyone would be some kind of non-binary or whatever. But that's a very, very long-term, like in the future, we won't have cars kind of thing, you know?
Okay. So I'm going to stop it there, and I'm actually going to let me reshare my screen again, and we are going to actually get into the actual paper here. So let's see. Okay. Let me zoom in a little bit. So Vaush and his okay, so Vaush is supposed to be this intellectual debate bro, you know, smart guy, you know, thinking about things critically. Well, all he did was look at one Twitter post from a Twitter activist looking at one like diagram from within the overall paper. He didn't even bother to read the original paper. That shows a severe amount of intellectual laziness because, okay, so first of all, there are severe methodological limitations with this paper because they are only looking at legal legal name change and diagnosis. So very clearly, they're excluding non-binary individuals who do not take the methodological or do not take the medical pathway. Why is this a problem for Vaush's statement that the trans trend, the ROGD phenomenon is somehow, you know, wrong or whatever? Well, it's a little convenient because most of the RGD, the rapid onset gender dysphoria, the trans trend claim is about non-binary. The like non-binary is the most trendy aspect of the trans phenomenon. Non-binary identification is the most trendy aspect of the phenomenon. So the fact that the methodology of the paper totally excludes that aspect of the phenomenon that is most trending, of course, you are not going to see the trendiness reflect in the data. If you actually go deeper into the paper and you look at the prevalence of gender transitions by birth cohort, specifically for transgender men, then you can see that as you go across the birth cohorts, so younger and younger generations, the prevalence of gender transition increases more and more and more. This fits into the general hypothesis that it is a youth subculture. It is a subculture of the youth, and it is trendy by the youth. Do you see a trend line? Okay, well, the other point was like, well, it leveled off because it decreased. Well, if you actually go into the paper, into the discussion section, they give several reasons why the rate of transition may have fell off very slightly. And also, we should note, it fell off very slightly. Well, one of the reasons is that it is plausible that the decline in new diagnoses is driven by a decrease in demand for referrals to gender clinics or greater hesitation among physicians to refer young patients to clinics. So remember, we were talking about legal diagnosis and or like diagnosis of a medical condition and legal name change. And this is falling off. And also, let's not forget that medicalization is only one aspect of transition. So you can socially transition. You can order a binder online, and a binder has negative health effects. You can order a binder, bind your breast, and that can cause permanent damage to your breast. And that would not show up on this graph because you don't have to go to the doctor to get a prescription for a binder, but that can still cause permanent damage. So you can have trendiness among females, young females, who are ordering binders, damaging their breasts, and that would not show up on this graph. And furthermore, the whole idea that like, oh well, it's like left-handed, there's only going to be a certain amount. Well, yeah, like within a certain subpopulation, within the population of, let's say, autistic females, you might see trendiness within that subpopulation, even if for populations that don't have those specific mental health comorbidities, you don't see the same trendiness. So just because it's not infinite trendiness, just because the graph isn't going to go up forever, it doesn't mean that there's not a social contagion. It doesn't mean that TikTok and other social media algorithms are not influencing people to take on these identifications, particularly when we're thinking about non-binariness. Because as I've shown in my previous video, you don't have to do anything to qualify as non-binary. You don't have to want hormones or surgeries or anything. You can just feel different from the other boys and girls. You can just like feel like you don't fit in with the gender norms associated with like your sex body, and that's gonna. So the identification of transness can be trendy within subpopulations. So it can be a trend among autistic teenagers. It can be a trend among LGBT youth. It doesn't mean it's a trend among everyone, but within certain subpopulations, it can be trendy, which is what we see. Look, like the diagnosis of transgender men is so this right here before age 20. So it's just exploded. Look at that. That is an explosion. That definitely indicates that it is not some innate biological phenomenon. This is a socially mediated, culturally mediated phenomenon. And this is only for legal name change and medical diagnosis. And furthermore, like this is only going through the established medical gatekeeping system. There are a lot of trans people who order their hormones online, DIY. There are online black markets for hormones that teenagers or trans people use. So there could be a whole range of medicalization that isn't even reflected on this data set. And furthermore, this is just for Sweden. Well, what about for the United States? Well, if we actually go into the paper, they talk about, let's see. Yeah, they say somewhere in here that this pattern of a falling off, a slight falling off, has not been found in any other country. So it could be the case that the falling off is reflective of the unique situations in Sweden, because they say that the falling off, the slight, very modest falling off, I should add, is due to the fact that there might be less demand of referrals. A dialogue with the gender clinics in Sweden revealed that they had some staff shortages from 2019 onwards, and at the same time were awaiting a decision to reorganize gender-affirming care. This could have led to an increased waiting time for a first visit, with fewer new diagnoses per year as a result. So even the own researchers of this paper acknowledge that it may not have even been the case that this falling off rate is reflective of actual, demographic trendiness, and it could just be an artifact of the health system in Sweden. Because again, this is looking at medical diagnosis. It's not looking at non-binary identification. It's not looking at DIY hormone usage. It's not looking at the ordering of binders from online. It's not looking at the way in which TikTok spreads identification of these identities. So Vaush's analysis is so wrong. It's so irresponsible. It's intellectually shallow. It is lazy, intellectual laziness. That is what it is. It is confirmation bias. He is looking to confirm his hypothesis, confirm his bias, because he's saying that, like, to suppose that non-binary identification, to suppose that within like the female population, that social contagions is, contagious, that this is contagious, social contagious, that's somehow like Nazi propaganda. Well, is it also Nazi propaganda to suppose that the self-diagnosis of Tourette's on TikTok was a social mediated social contagion? Or is it Nazi propaganda to talk about how dissociative identity or multiple personality disorder was a social mediated social contagion back in like the 70s and 80s, when the movie and the book Sybil came out? Is it Nazi propaganda to talk about how anorexia is a socially contagious thing? Is it Nazi propaganda to talk about how suicide can be socially contagious, when like that movie 13 Reasons Why came out, or whatever? The female population is more susceptible to social contagion. This is a proven trend. This is like it has been well documented in the medical and historical literature that the female population is more susceptible to trendiness. This is why it used to be the case that transgenderism was a largely male to female, M to F male phenomenon, but now it has been completely flipped, such that it is now a more F to M female phenomenon. Why? Well, because it's tapping into the social trendiness, and that social trendiness is tapping into the latent potentiality for females to be trapped into these social contagions. This is a well-established fact. So if Vaush had actually bothered to read this literature and been intellectually honest and engaged with the hypothesis in good faith, rather than just confirming his political biases, because apparently you're a Nazi if you think that teenagers are influenced by what's trendy. Like the transgender non-binary identification it's like the new subculture. It's the new emos, it's the new goths, it's the new hippies. It is a social trend, and it is not bigoted to acknowledge that. We can be concerned about this because this subculture is also associated with the ritual body modification, because it is a religious movement. It is a it is essentially a cult. It has cultish phenomena associated with it. There's a language of fanaticism associated with this, and you will be accused of being a transphobe and a bigot of even talking about this. So yeah, this whole thing is just ludicrous, and Vaush is extremely intellectually dishonest here, and shame on him for claiming to be a debate bro, an intellectual who has any amount of rigor. And so it's just ridiculous. So okay, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.